Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and another watercolour tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how I painted this cute rabbit using the dry brush technique. This technique is a really quick and easy way to create realistic looking animal fur, even if you are brand new to watercolour. So I hope you enjoy the video and maybe get inspired to try it out for yourself. So the dry brush technique is, as the name suggests, when you add paint from a dry brush to dry paper. And before we get into the rabbit painting, I'm going to show you a few of the brushes I'm going to use and demonstrate exactly how to do this simple technique on a scrap piece of my watercolour paper. As you will see, you can get a great result whatever type of brush you have, so you definitely don't need the same as me or to go out and buy any new ones. Different brushes do give slightly different results though, so if you are interested, I will list all the art supplies I'm using today down in the description box below this video, along with a reference photo from Pixabay. The first brush I'm going to use is this rather strange looking Deerfoot brush from Princeton Select range. This is 3/8 of an inch in size and contains a mixture of natural and synthetic hair, and it's actually a lot softer than it looks. To paint realistic looking fur, I simply dampen my brush in clean water, take off the excess on a paper towel and then tap it into the watercolour paint on my palette. I then blot off any excess water and paint from my brush again on my paper towel before applying it to my watercolour paper. I use a light flicking motion with my brush and can easily change the length or direction of the fur just by varying my brush strokes. You can also add multiple layers if you like to build up depth and add a variety of different colours to your fur, depending on what you're painting. I think this brush will make light of larger areas of fur on my painting, but probably won't be great for smaller areas where you want a bit more precision. The next brush is a small size 1 flat brush from UK brand Royal and Langnickel. This range of brushes are really inexpensive and are made with synthetic hair. I use this one a lot in my animal paintings as it allows you to create fur detail quickly but with a bit more precision. And it can be used either flat to the paper or on the side in even smaller areas. The bristles are quite firm and tend to naturally separate out a bit when applying paint in this way, which really helps to create the separations between the fur. My next brush is this size 8 silver black velvet brush. It's one of my favourite brushes and I use it a lot. It's a blend of natural and synthetic hair again, and whilst it's soft and flexible and comes to a really nice point when wet, it can also be gently splayed out when dry, enabling you to paint fur really easily using the dry brush technique. However, I wouldn't recommend splaying out the bristles of any natural hair brushes like this, as it may damage the brush and spoil the shape. I've also included a silver black velvet script liner brush in my brushes today, but I'm only going to use this to paint the rabbit's fine whiskers. So the last type of brush that is probably most common is the round brush, and these can also create realistic fur, although it can take a bit longer. These are from Rosemary Co, and I have a few different sizes. They are great for painting individual hairs and for much smaller areas where you need more control over where your paint is going. Again, if you are dry brushing, you want to make sure that you soak up any excess paint and water on your brush on a paper towel before applying it to the paper, or else you end up painting more wet on dry, and you won't get that same easy textured look where the dry brush skips over some parts of the dry paper and leaves some parts free of paint. I usually choose to paint on 100% cotton cold press paper for this reason, as the rougher surface of the paper really helps to create a realistic and natural look for fur and hair. Whatever paper or brushes you have though, this technique is really quick and easy to master, and can be used alone or in combination with other watercolour techniques. For my rabbit painting, I decided to start off by painting a base layer on the ears, using the wet on wet technique. So I pre-wet the paper with clean water first, and then painted on a watery mix of Pyrrol Scarlet and burnt umber. I also painted on some watery Payne's blue grey and some more watery burnt umber, and let the colours blend together on the surface of the damp paper. I did the same on the other ear too, but this time mixed in more burnt umber and Payne's blue grey to the darker parts of the ear in shadow. Whilst waiting for that to dry, I turn my attentions to the lightest area of fur on the rabbit's neck and between his front paws, and use the dry brush technique to begin mapping out the fur here. I used my small flat brush and some buff titanium watercolour. Even with this lightest layer, I was careful to observe both the length and direction of fur growth here from my reference photo, and tried to mimic that with my brush strokes. I then went in with Payne's Blue Grey, and used the same dry brush on its edge to map out the darker fur. First around the rabbit's muzzle, then around the ear, and also around the eye. I find it helps to separate fur into sections early on, as it makes the rest of the painting easier. I continue to use this small flat brush to fill in the lightest area of fur on the face, but switched over to a small round brush to paint carefully around the rabbit's nose. Here I wanted a soft base layer, so painted onto dry paper and blurred out the edges with a clean damp brush. Depending on the colour of your animal or subject, you may choose to paint a base layer of watercolour down first, before adding fur detail, like I did for the ears and around the nose. But on the face and rabbit's back, I went straight in with the dry brushing technique, since there is a lot of white fur within the grey here. This meant I could use the white of the paper for the white fur, and build up the depth of fur by adding multiple layers. The advantage of dry brushing is that the paper dries super quickly, which means you don't have to wait long before you can go over with your next layer. To add a layer of fur texture to the ears, I then tried using the Deerfoot brush. I found it gave a nice soft result, but it was hard to keep within the boundaries of the rabbit's ear. So for more control, I switched back to the flat brush again. Don't forget though to keep checking back at your reference photo to see how the length and direction of fur changes around the different parts of the face, as this will help add shape and form to the animal, as well as making the fur look more realistic and true to life. Here by the ear, for example, the fur is longer, so I use longer flicking motions with my brush. Over here on the side of the face, however, the fur is much shorter, and I use the very corner of my flat brush to add in almost tiny dashes for the fur here. Another thing I look at are the shapes that I can see within the fur and how they join up with other shapes. Here, for example, there is a grey section of fur that starts at the rabbit's nose and sweeps up and over the eye, so I paint that in. There's also an area of darker fur under the eye here, so I paint that in too. Now, as you begin to build up your fur layers, you may want to paint in the facial features like the eyes and nose, as the contrast with the darker values here can really help you to more accurately gauge the values in other areas of your painting, so you can make any necessary adjustments. I paint the nose first, wet on dry, using a pointed round brush and the same Pyrrol Scarlet and burnt umber mix that I used in the ears. Then I paint the eye, again painting wet on dry. I love painting eyes as it really brings a portrait to life. Here I'm using Payne's Blue Grey and Indigo, and I remember to leave the highlight free of paint. Moving on to the rabbit's back next, and for this larger area I use the Deerfoot brush again, just to lay down a light grey base colour. I've added more water to my brush this time, so I get a mixture of soft and hard edges. Once this has dried, I can then add in the different coloured fur sections on top, using the dry brush technique again. This flat brush was really useful for painting the fur down the rabbit's front legs too, and separating out the fur on the body from the back legs just by using a few short flicking strokes with my brush. I continued this process all the way down the right hand side, adding in darker greys and browns in the shadow areas and over the back leg. For the left hand side of the body though, where the fur is very bright and lacking in much colour or fur detail, I decided to paint on some dilute Payne's Blue Grey, just to define the shape of the front leg and push the back leg back to add a bit of depth to my painting. Ordinarily I might have also painted a background to add contrast, but this is going to go on my daughter's bedroom wall and she wanted it quite simple. I switched over to my silver black velvet brush for this and painted onto dry paper, but kept the edges nice and soft by running along them with a clean damp brush. In contrast, for the fur on the front leg here, I painted onto dry paper using a diluted mix of Pyrrol Scarlet and burnt umber again, as I could see warmer pinky hues here from my reference photo. So our rabbit is starting to take shape now, but to really bring him to life I need to paint another layer onto the eye and nose. This I do with a small pointed round brush and more concentrated indigo and Payne's Blue Grey watercolour. Here I'm painting a layer of Payne's Blue Grey all over the pupil and around the outside edge of the eye too. When that's dry, I paint on another layer to make sure it's as dark as it needs to be. And I add yet another layer of indigo onto the iris to make the eye look really dark and shiny. Next, I painted some shadow to the nose, and after that I took a step back. I was happy with the fur texture, but knew I needed to add more dimension to make this rabbit look realistic. To do this, I decided to paint over some areas of the face with a watery glaze, and this is where watercolour is really versatile, because you can use several different techniques together to get the look you're after. And because watercolour is a transparent medium, adding a glaze or light wash of colour on top of the dry paper won't cover up the fur detail I've already painted in. I'm much happier with how that looks now, so I'm going to go back and add another layer of watercolour to the ear here. This time I've added transparent orange to Pyrrol Scarlet to get more of a peachy pink glow. I also darken up the fur here, and even add in some Winsor Violet on the outside edge of the ear, and I'm painting wet on dry now. Having added these layers to the face, there's just a few more things I want to do. The first is to add a bit more depth and interest to the white fur on the rabbit's chest. So it's back to more dry brushing with some buff titanium watercolour. I also finish off the details on the feet, and paint the suggestion of some shadow underneath the rabbit with Payne's Blue Grey. Then, with the small round brush, I add definition to a few areas of fur on the chest by painting negatively around some fur shapes. On the ear here, I paint one final layer and add a pinky glaze to the rabbit's cheeks. And now to add those finishing touches. For this I grab my script liner brush and paint the vein on the inside of the rabbit's ear. And finally the eyelashes and whiskers. I really hope you found this video helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments box below, and don't forget to give it a thumbs up if you did like it. Subscribe to my channel if you're watching for the first time, and hit the notification bell as well to be notified as soon as I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching. Take care, have a great weekend, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.